What's up, Shining Otaku? It's Cloud9
And
and this is Shining Spotlight, the stream where we highlight creatives in the industry in order to inspire you guys. Today we have an incredibly crafty and acclaimed comic book duo. They were nominated 6 times for a Harvey Award, which is basically the equivalent of an Emmy in comics. Their works famously include Rainbow in the Dark, Kitty Game, and the Uniques, which is one series that's currently going on, their major project, along with, and they've also done with their collective expertise, a guide called The Complete Guide to Self-Publishing Comics back in 2015. Today we welcome the wife and husband duo, Comfort and Adam.
Hello,
welcome.
you guys.
Oh, thank you guys so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. Honestly, I've met you guys, multiple times. You guys I feel like we're all like kind of in a sense, like in the same like community because, we all know Mark Dudley, he's like our teacher.
Yep.
And thank you so much for having us, you guys.
Yeah,
It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, definitely. There's so much knowledge you guys put out there, and I really think that a lot of it would be beneficial for a lot of people out there to hear, especially considering the great works, like for example the Uniques that you guys have made. It's funny when I go through the Uniques, one would probably initially think like, oh, is this going to be like the X-Men, or is this going to be like another comic that that you may read that might be more like for example like Fantastic Four. But you actually get kind of mind blown a little bit that no, like there's a lot more to it than just a team of a collective of uniquely powered beings.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is what happens when you decide to do a superhero story that's really a big thing about society.
Well, it's you reach a point when you grow up. Like we both grew up with superhero stories on Marvel and DC stuff. Like probably like 90% of people who are in comics, we grew up on those stories. But you can only follow that stuff for so long before you start realizing these characters are never going to change. Spider-Man's always going to be Spider-Man, no matter how long we go. Like, Bruce Wayne is just going to keep accruing Robins. He's going to collect them like Counselor Batman. He's going to have this army of teenage boys.
But he can't get those silver wings.
He'll never get the silver wings. That I've said for a long time. There is nothing DC will not do to Dick Grayson, Tim Drake, to prevent Bruce Wayne from ever having to have silver in his hair.
So I think beyond that, beyond wanting to see something happen more with the characters, you want to see what else superhero comics can do.
What can they be? What if you took those limits off? Mainstream superhero stories tend to be stuck in a perpetual second act. We get the origin, and then we complicate things, and then we just sort of keep complicating for infinity.
And then we reboot.
And then we reboot back to an origin. And start that process again, but we never get to an ending. So when Comfort and I sat down to do Uniques, we set out to do a superhero story that begins at the start of the third act of this world's story.
So what our job is going to be is taking 7 characters from their teenhood into their 40s and 50s as forces in the world and the world around them.
Yeah, see all the ways that they change the world and all the ways that the world changes them.
Oh yeah, and that starts with Hope Sage in this case, of course. With her being the last, and I'm not sure, if I can. Am I allowed to say it? When she's the last?
It's the last.
It's in the first issue, so you're
okay. She's the last telepath or scion of, of her. I guess you could say her power.
Yes, her power set is the last one out there.
The last one with it. Yeah, she survives an event that kills everybody else with her kind of powers, and she's the only one left.
And the funny thing is, like, I remember originally, like, I was like wondering, like, okay, well, is her sister gonna also, especially since her name is like Conscious, like, I was like, okay, does she have the same abilities like the parents? But I'm like, no, she's different, and I feel like she's actually in a way way different because she can obviously shapeshift.
Sure.
She is also adopted.
She's adopted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So she is, and she's also something. Conscience represents something we really wanted to do with our universe, which is. This is a world where people with powers are just a normal part of society. There's no expectation that happening to have powers means you're going to go out and put on a mask and fight crime. or put on a different mask and rob banks, right? There's more than two things. Most people don't want to do that.
Right.
Most of us just want to live our lives and do our normal things.
If 10% of the population had powers, it would be a monumental task for society to take on, but there'd be no way to have that delineation for what people do. So how do people get assimilated into society with these powers?
Conscience is somebody who didn't want to be a superhero. She didn't want that life. So as a shapeshifter, she goes out to Hollywood and becomes a stunt person, which is, it's not a bad gig if you've been trained to defend yourself your whole life and can look like anybody you want to.
Right.
Yeah. No, seriously. I mean, that honestly, like, what I'm kind of wondering is where did you get the inspiration, and not so much with Hope, but with Conscious, actually? Because, I mean, being, like, in a family where, like, for example, like, I think, you know, my family is pretty diverse, right? So I can kind of relate to that. Where did you get the inspiration for that particular character? You know, like, the dynamic between her and Hope?
Well, you know, I do have sisters, and then writing sisters into the comic, I think, was a really important thing for me. But for that character, and we'll explore this more later, you know, how I look and how I act isn't as, and I'm speaking for the character, isn't nearly so important as it is for us, because she's not stuck in that skin. She can be anything she wants to be. So how does her mentality change because of her power set?
Yeah. There's something that happens with siblings generally, especially when the elder sibling gets out front and really like defines themselves, especially if they, and as often happens with firstborns, they define themselves by carrying on the traditions of the family. The next one in line wants to find some space that they can occupy for themselves. You know, my older sister is already doing all these things, so I'm never going to get to be anything but her little sister if I do those same things. I've got to go do something else. I've got to live my own life and find my own way. And so that's what Conscience does. She breaks away and finds a path for herself, somewhere where she can excel outside of the shadow of her parents and her sister, without rejecting her family, obviously, but, you know, wanting to have her own thing. Her own
and
life.
Conscience is the character that actually is a very sort of tertiary character. She's not in most of the book, but that speaks to the idea that we're trying to build a world rather than have a small cast that we're always watching. You know, it's going to go for 10 seasons. So the series runs in canonical timeline from 1996. That's when it starts, and it ends in 2030.
Yeah.
So that's the span of time that's happening throughout the book, and there's 10 seasons to this series.
The reason that we called it the Uniques instead of naming it after the particular characters that we're following is because we always wanted the freedom to go anywhere we wanted. Like with Naruto, there was often the complaint with Naruto that every other character in this story is way more interesting than Naruto is. But because it's named Naruto, it always has to come back and be his story. So we didn't want to be trapped by that. We want to be able to go all over the place. And so being able to tell stories with Conscience and explore, you know, the mentality of a shapeshifter in a world where being a shapeshifter does not disqualify you from leading an otherwise very normal life, that's fascinating to us. So let's tell some of those stories. Why not?
No, yeah, that makes it a lot less predictable, to be honest with you, you know. But really quick, I want to say, Nico, you know, I saw you crack a smile when they said, you know, mentioned the whole thing of being the oldest and, you know, setting out your own path, because he's the oldest, I think, amongst your whole family, right? Like, not just your immediate family.
Yeah, in the entirety of the immediate family, or both sides of the family, really, yeah, I am the oldest. So many times I've seen my younger siblings either get, how should I put it, jealous in certain instances, or envious, or can never live up enough, or, you know, the family's already got their first love out of me, and and they always feel like they're second fiddle.
Or two, little siblings get away with things, and you're like, God damn.
See, on the flip side, growing up, I had that problem. So
Yeah, we're both elder siblings too, so I remember watching my sister getting away with stuff, and I was like, you never would have let me do
No.
that.
Yes.
Never. But by the time you have grown and the next one's coming up, they're like, oh, we
That's
freaked
good.
out the
It's
first
fine.
time around.
It's
We
fine.
know you're going to be okay. So they get all their freak out done with you, and then the next ones, they're much more
Right.
relaxed.
You paved the way.
Basically.
Good job.
Yeah. You get different
Well,
parents.
thank you. I appreciate it, and it's welcome.
Now, I have to ask. What? Of course, I understand why you guys have formulated. You just explained as far as why you named it the Uniques and you didn't choose to name it Hope or name it the Sages or anything like that to like minimize the story.
Yeah, right.
But like, why did you decide to set it in particular in 1996? Was there a big reason, or you just picked?
Because we are the
There's a couple
age
reasons.
of the younger kids in the
Yeah.
book itself, so we
One of
have
the
that
reasons-
shared experience.
Authenticity in writing, in particular in dialogue and characterization, are extremely important to us. Extremely important to us. One of the biggest influences on our work is the work of the writer David Simon, who is most famous for The Wire, Treme. He just did The Deuce, Plot Against America. But one of the things that defines the shows he creates and the journalistic work that he's done is he captures the voice of the characters that he writes. It feels real. You feel like you are listening into a real conversation. And we very much wanted that degree of authenticity with our work. And so setting it in the 90s, we were kids in the 90s.
Right.
So it's easier for us to fall into that kind of slang and make it feel real for that time.
Well, honestly, this is why, too, we brought Mark into this, and Mark has been reading season 2 to make sure that all the characters continue to feel authentic.
Right, and they don't all just sound like us and variations of the two of us
Right.
over and over.
Because some of the characters, if you're telling a story about the world rather than one or two people, some people are going to be outside your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And so you need other voices to say, hey, this sounds right. What about this? Maybe you should go over here.
The other reason we chose the 90s was because we wanted to have a nice long lead-in on any world events so that we can pick and choose what we use in the story and what we don't.
Right.
We both lived through 9/11.
Right.
We were in college when 9/11 happened. And we remember when Marvel Comics in particular, because all their books are set in New York, and they had this real heavy responsibility, kind of like, do we cover this or not? Do we talk about it or not? And they did an issue of Spider-Man about 9/11 that was just about the least authentic thing I have ever read.
And it's done in a way like it had to be rushed and haphazard. And you had things like Magneto and Doctor Doom shedding some tears
Doom
over
cried.
this. And I was like, Doctor Doom would be like, wow, I wish I had done this.
Yeah.
You know what? I blew up New York last weekend.
Right? And at the same time this is happening, there really is a storyline going on where Magneto is destroying New York. So that kind of stuff it gets so weird, and it pulls you out of the story, and it feels really, you don't understand an event when it's happening. We can only understand these events with hindsight, and often with a long period of hindsight. Only a decade later do we know all of the reasons that the Iraq War happened, for instance. It took 20 years, 30 years to find out about Reagan funneling crack into the inner cities. It sounded like an insane conspiracy theory, and it still does, but we've got the documents. We know this happened. So we wanted to have a long lead-in on major world events so that by the time we get to that point in the story, we can decide, okay, first off, does it make sense for this event to happen in our version of the world? And second off, if it does happen, who are the major players? What are the reasons it occurs? What are the aftermath things that come out of this? How do we want to handle it so that we can approach these things respectfully, but also with as broad a perspective as possible?
Hindsight is always 20/20.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean that's very concise. I mean, honestly, no, like right on the nose. To be honest with you, when you're explaining as far as like, for example, like Marvel not really covering, like for example 9/11 or some of those events, as well as they probably could have.
Well, and it's just also hard in the moment.
It's hard. They had an almost impossible job. This thing just happens. Nobody could have been prepared for it.
Right.
And we've got to, okay, what are we going to do for next month's issue? What are we going to, how do we do, what would, and of course, so many of them living in New York or being from New York, the creators, they wanted to be able to speak to this, to say something both cathartic for themselves, but also reaching out to the audience.
So when we did the inciting incident in the book, not just, 2 towers are blown up, but all of New York is blown up with the UN. We wanted to do sort of a 9/11 thing to start everybody out with and go back. So every issue, the opening scene for the issue is a flashback to one of the characters in the team and where they were, because it was such a seminal thing. And for us, we were young and beginning college when it was happening. You guys were probably tiny at this point. But if you're old enough, you have a story about it. Just like, our parents had a story about when Kennedy died. And if you don't remember 9/11, something will happen in your lives where you say, I was here when this happened.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. We all can already attest to being like, eventually we're going to say, well, I remember when COVID-19 happened.
Exactly.
Yep.
The quarantine.
Exactly.
I heard about it.
Quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
The great quarantine of 2019.
Yeah, that's going to be the major story right there. Actually, how has this been affecting you guys, like COVID-19?
Here, well, when we start answering this question, I'm going to move over and start our stream so we can get some questions possibly from the audience. And if you want, you can move to arts.
So one of the things that happened immediately is that all massive public events were shut down. And that meant conventions. Conventions everywhere have been shut down. I don't expect them to come back this year, period. I would be surprised if they're back next year.
I would be surprised if they're back before there is
some kind of vaccine. Yeah. And that was huge. That's huge for a lot of people in our industry. There are a lot of creators, even major creators who you'd think would be fine, rely on conventions for a significant portion of their income. That's certainly true with us. We looked at the numbers, and by not having conventions, last year conventions amounted for around $40,000 of our income last year. That's a pretty big loss.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. So that was huge. But the biggest thing conventions are for us as independent creators, and as indie gets, is the ability to reach out to an audience, to introduce people to us, to the work that we do, get them a chance to see the book and talk to them about it. It's really hard to get that kind of connection with people online in a digital space because there is so much noise online. It's a world of static. You're not just a small fish in a large pond. You're like a piece of kelp in the ocean. There is so much. So that has been the biggest struggle for us professionally since quarantine kicked in, is how do we find ways of reaching out to communities and continuing to market ourselves without having the ability to do the kind of one-on-one stuff that we would have done at conventions.
That makes sense, because in that one-on-one connection, you almost can, I don't want to say you can figure somebody out, but you can see what they're looking for, what they're connecting with. They can look at, for example, they look at a print that you have, like a fan art. You can kind of gauge and perceive, okay, they might be into, I don't know, let's say you did a fan art of I don't know, Death Note, right? They might be able to say, okay, that's light, and you might say, okay, I see this person's kind of into this type of story. Let me talk to them about it. You can't do that, if you can't have that interaction. So
yeah, no, it's tough, and they can, in interacting with you, find out more about what it is you're trying to do. It's a lot easier for somebody to talk to me for 5 minutes and know what I'm about and what the book is about. And if you're trying to read something online, that's a lot harder to make that connection. I can't, like you say, in talking with somebody, I can figure you out a bit and I can get a sense of what you're into. And I can tell you, sometimes I just get a sense, you are somebody who should be reading Rainbow in the Dark. I just know that you will love this book, or you're definitely a unique person. please let me show you this book. Like, I can make those kinds of connections, but online, I don't know one screen name from another. And there's a lot of people who've tried to recreate digitally the convention experience, but you can't really, or at least nobody's figured out a good way to do it yet.
Yeah.
And certainly nobody's figured out a good way to do it in terms of like the commerce aspect of me being able to market and present and sell my product to you through this screen. That it just doesn't work. The best we've been able to do is like online panels and seminars and stuff, but it's not the same. You know, we're all doing the best we can, but this has been tough. This has been really tough. You realize at times like this just how much the convention experience was a cornerstone of the comics industry.
No, that's true. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
in some ways though, like, do you feel as though the convention industry, even before this though, obviously this COVID-19 has changed everything, right? But even before this, how do you feel as though things have changed with the convention scene? Because if you think about it, like, I hear stories of how the convention scene was, like, let's say, for example, in the 90s, right? And then versus, like, you look at, like, now. Like, I feel like if you go to, like, let's say a Motor City Comic Con now or something like that, they try to gear it a lot more towards other forms of media. And I feel like all of us as creatives sometimes get lost within the mix. Do you feel as though that the way that things have changed is something that do you feel like it's going to continue to go in that direction, or do you feel as though we will eventually be able to reach some sort of balance in terms of how
here's
things
what
are?
I'm going to say is comics, as usual, missed an opportunity,
Yes.
a golden opportunity to get people into comics. In the last few years, they were always like, you know what, people will start reading comics, that's fine. But, you know, when you have the candy, which is movies and animation and, you know, mobile games and stuff like that, you're like, oh, reading, that's hard. I don't think I want to read.
It's harder to read. It's more of an investment of time to read a book than watch a movie. It takes a lot more effort on your part to do it. It takes a lot more commitment on your part to do it.
And the other thing was your gateway comics, Marvel and DC, were unfortunately
Completely unwilling to be the gateway.
right. So, you know, you might say, I want to go read, you know, Captain America. Fantastic. Where do I start? I have no idea. It's baffling.
There are a dozen volume ones for Daredevil in the last 10 years.
And,
which volume one shall I begin with?
And I just want to say to David Peterson here, who's on our stream, David, we are not doing a teaching stream, but we are doing an interview. And so we thought we'd stream at the same time. And then also another convention that's also furloughed is actually sharing our stream as well. So
it's the change that you're talking about as conventions have become less comic book focused and more general, broader pop culture focused is necessary. And the reason it's necessary is because you need butts in the seats. You need feet through the door. And if you can't bring people in, you're not going to have an audience. And none of us are going to have a chance to talk to anybody. What we've been seeing in the last several years, and obviously a lot of this is anecdotal, we don't have access to data, but it has certainly felt for the last few years like the convention scene is a bubble that is beginning to contract. Because there has been a sense of finality to a lot of major pop culture properties. Marvel wrapped up with Endgame, and
even though it's still going,
there is a sense of being finished. Star Wars Episode 9, it's finished. Game of Thrones, finished. There's a lot of the major things that brought the casual observer, got them excited about nerd stuff and made them want to go and play at a convention for a weekend. A lot of it's wrapping up, winding down, going away. And a lot of the new stuff hasn't been successful at replacing the excitement of the old stuff. And in the meantime, Marvel and DC haven't done a particularly good job of reaching out to that new audience and making them into fans of anything more than just the movies and media properties. they're still using the same old tricks, primarily to try to twist the arm of retailers into being forced or coerced into ordering more product than they can actually sell, which has been really
Bad
destructive
practice.
to the retailer side. And it's producing a lot of stuff that the average reader just isn't that interested in. I mean, an amazing seller, like a top tier seller in comics, is moving like 80,000 copies. Can you imagine?
Or
Any
they
other industry where 80,000 copies is considered like mind blowing. Where else can you go that 80,000 is a smash success?
I am going to quick say to the people who are watching over here on our stream, any questions that you have, feel free to lay them on us here. I do have a question from David Peterson when we're ready.
So conventions have been contracting, I think, and COVID is making it worse. COVID is making it far worse. But I think there is a chance that this has a rubber band effect. Because when everything is lifted and when conventions can come back, there is a chance that there is going to be so much excitement that we can do things in public again.
Oh, now wait.
Year of serious convention returns could be huge. And if people really take advantage by focusing not on business as usual, but on what are some things that we can do to not just get people through the doors, but to get them hooked on the product that we're actually trying to sell, get them interested in the books that we make, in the characters that we create, in the creators who tell these stories. We can make long-term fans out of these casual, people walking in. It could become something. It could become a major movement. I don't know, but comics traditionally, I think Mark Waid put it best when he said that the story of the history of comic books as a medium is the story of a mass medium turning itself into a niche market. And
there's really no, like, you think about it, there's really no excuse for that at this point. Especially considering the fact that I'm like, Endgame literally hit like the highest selling or like gross selling movie of all time. So I'm like, these, as well as these movies were doing, I'm like, this should have at least been an opportunity to get more people, not just people into Marvel, but people into comics to get more invested, to say, where do a lot of these storylines come from? Because a lot of them have inspiration from the comics, and I'm like, there's a lot of stories that people are missing out on. So many great stories, outside of like Marvel or DC. There's on Netflix all the time, like you're just saying, like, I mean, I see stories that have had inspiration from different graphic novels, actually. So,
well, but you do see with those others that there is a translation to new sales, to new readers, to new fans. Walking Dead
you got a point,
has been dominating the top 20. I think there were periods where more than half of the top 20 trade paperbacks in a month were all volumes of The Walking Dead. Hellboy, when the Hellboy movies come out, Hellboy sells like hotcakes. Watchmen sells like hotcakes every time they put out new Watchmen stuff. And the thing that they all have in common is, if you walk into a store and say, "Hello, my good sir, I've just seen the film Hellboy, and I'm curious to engage with this product," they can say, "Here you are, Volume 1, begin." And it makes sense.
Literally, yeah.
This is why anime translated to huge manga sales. Because you look at the anime bookshelves and you're like, oh, here's number 1 and number 2, and it's very simple to follow, easy to follow. And they're not playing tricks with the audience. And they're not relaunching new number 1s every time there's a new creative team. And they're not constantly twisting their stories into knots to create more crossovers to try and trick you or force you into buying books you don't want to have to buy. They just give it, like Kirkman's just giving you good Walking Dead month after month. And that's it. And it works. It works almost every time. Wanted was not a good movie. But that book sold like crazy when it came out. Because if you had even a little interest, here's the book. Done. It's that simple. So for things that have a direct and easy connection and an easy, obvious place to begin, people will begin. But unfortunately, Marvel and DC are the juggernauts that also serve as kind of the elephants in the room. We're sort of stuck with them. And rather than taking up their place and becoming like the Pixar of comics, they are, and understandably so, they are exhibiting a lot of the traits that you see in what I think of as cowardly capitalism. We have so much money that we're terrified of losing any money. So let's just do safe formula for as long as it works. And only when it has utterly failed us will we try a different safe formula.
And then that's going to keep things kind of just the way that things are. And to me, at that point, you're going to, I mean, who knows if things don't change, and it could go downhill if you're not really trying to work on growth, like real growth. But I want to switch gears here for a moment, because I know you got, like, I know you guys wanted to throw your, show us what you guys are working on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you start that point, I'm gonna boot you real quick. I'm gonna reset your part of the stream because you were bugging out.
Oh, I am.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Am I better?
Go ahead, start.
Okay. All right. Actually, we have a couple questions here too. That just popped up. Let's see here. What's the first question from? Okay. Right now, most of my money has gone to Indiegogo comics over Marvel and DC. I even started buying it. Oh yeah, or started buying manga. Yeah, okay, I see. Oh, so that's from Manems. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Is it
Manny Names?
Manny Names.
Manny Names? Okay.
Acronym for men.
Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, no, I mean, to be honest with you, I can understand going to a lot of more creative, funding a lot more creative projects. And, sometimes I feel like some people are kind of scared to do that, which rightfully so, because there's been situations before on Kickstarter and stuff where projects have gone south, but, where people took the money and ran or whatever. But I am happy to see that people are funding a lot of more crowdfunding comics, because there's a lot of stories out there that we don't see get told, simply because maybe there's just not enough money to get the publication out there. I don't know if you guys have heard about, which I thought this was kind of weird, but I know Todd McFarlane, didn't he recently do like a Kickstarter for his one of his Spawn toys?
It's not surprising. People, major companies are using Kickstarter more and more because if they build story or but
all right, take 5.
Is he? I think he's bugging out just a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry, Adam.
Both.
Great, Adam.
Yeah.
I think that's it because I'm actually getting a tough time over here. I'm is reconnecting.
Okay, well, I think we're all back. We can all hear each other. Okay. Now, we only heard part of what you said. I don't know if you mind repeating that one more time for us.
Yeah, no. It's just that you're seeing a lot more businesses using Kickstarter or forcing creators to go through Kickstarter before they can be published. We've seen a number of comics having to be Kickstarted first, and then Image will carry them, or Dark Horse will carry them, or whichever. And it's just, this is the way that modern American capitalism works. Put all of the risk onto the lowest person on the totem pole, and then kick as much profit as possible up to the person at the top of the pole. It's why I'm excited to see there being more options for creators to go their own way, to not need these publishers, to not need the middlemen, because what are we giving them a cut for at the end of the day? They provide less and less. They expect more and more. What are they doing for us? Or, what have you done for me lately, I guess?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I agree, 100% with that statement. The second question is from David Peterson, which, we heard from Comfort just a moment ago, so I'm glad to actually see David Peterson now.
Yeah.
Sorry to have interrupted your interview. I didn't understand your interview was being recorded right now. Oh, no, you didn't interrupt anything. This is all for us to all have a discussion together. So if you have any questions, just bring them in. That's welcome to everyone. We welcome questions, so, this is a conversation, not just with us, but with everyone, so to speak. Now, not that being said, we can actually move on to the next part. So if you guys want to switch over to your, showing us what you guys are working on, that would be great.
And David does have a question here, and the question is, let's see here. Oh, hold on. All right, what genre would you like to see more of in comics that aren't usually being tackled?
Ooh, okay.
It's a tough one because I feel like we're doing a whole bunch of different genres
We
now.
are, but I can think of some things I would like to see. I would like to see more fantasy that's not like Dungeons and Dragons.
Not stuck in a RPG.
Yeah, right.
Sword Art Online.
Less isekai.
Less isekai. Give me something that's a little more original. Some different kinds of fantasy stuff. I would like to see, honestly, there's a lot of sci-fi, but I feel like the sci-fi we tend to get in comics is the harder sci-fi, if that makes sense. Like pre-Star Wars, early 70s sci-fi kind of stuff. We see a lot. I'd like to see a lot more like the sci-fantasy adventure kind of comics. There's not a lot of that either. I feel like comics are really great if you're interested in crime fiction. There's tons of crime fiction out there. It's obviously like you can drown in superheroes if you really wanted to. There's a handful of things that tend to get done often.
Yeah.
Horror is becoming a much more common genre staple in comics now. And I would like to see more like fun fantasy.
Can I tell you what I'd like to see? More
Sure.
good books that aren't just movie pitches.
Yeah,
That's the genre I'd like to see.
that's true. That's probably one of the things I'm the most tired of. Is there's a lot of times when you see a new comic come out, you're like, oh, they wanted to pitch this as a movie or TV series,
Yeah.
but they thought they would have a better job if it was a comic first. There are a lot of creators, like I feel like Mark Millar's entire output at this point is just, here's another movie pitch, volume 1 of a story that you're going to get really interested in, but you'll never see any more of because
I worked with Kick-Ass, so it's like I work with Kick-Ass.
Yeah, that's frustrating. I wish there were more people making comics because they wanted to make comics, not because it's cheaper to make a comic than a movie.
I see, just as almost like a, like their pitch Bible. Yeah, I mean, I hear you on that. Appreciate the medium, for what it is. There's different, just like if someone writes a novel, they may just want it to be a novel, or they may want it to just be, simply a comic. That's not to say you can't adaptate it, but that's not the reason why you made it.
Yeah.
Or if somebody wants to go and make a movie, you would think just go ahead and pursue that. But I guess it's easier for them to do one versus the other.
It is what it is. It is what it is. But that's why when you get stuff that comes along, like Saga was such a breath of fresh air because it was so different and so unique, and there was nothing else like it on the stands.
I think I like anything Brian K. Vaughan does, to be
Well,
honest.
sure. Yeah, Paper Girls, which just wrapped up relatively recently, was fantastic. Everything he does, just about, I've had an interest in.
You know why? Because it's well thought out, and he gives a shit.
He cares about the story first. Yeah, you can tell that he's there to do this. I'm making this book because I am interested in this story.
Because
This
I'm
is what I want to
interested
do.
in making a comic. I'm interested in being invested in this. I'm interested in more than a 3-issue mini that maybe turns into something. He's throwing his weight behind it, and I think that's what's good about it. There's a commitment to what he does.
You can tell when a creator really cares about what they're making. When they are as passionate about it as you are about reading it, and that makes a huge difference. It's hard to get people excited about something that you're not excited about.
Oh yeah,
Oh, I can agree.
And even the Netflix originals, they've been picking up stuff that it seemed like they actually cared.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard of Magic Order. That was by Mark Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was spice right there.
Yeah.
Now, I want to center a little bit more on like your guys' creative process on how you guys do things. Like who are and I'm going to make the complete distinction between this because I think it's really important too. Who are your art influences and who are your writing influences?
Yeah, that's a very important distinction.
Can I just say that question one more time so the other people over here can hear it because they're having a hard time hearing? So who are our art influences and who are our writing influences? And then when we're done with this question, we've got another question over here from Tara.
Okay. So with our art, the major influences were basically the entire crew at Cliffhanger Comics in the late 90s.
Go look it up, everybody.
So Chris Pichello,
Cliffhanger crew,
Matt Carrera, J. Scott Campbell was huge. His work on Danger Girl was just revolutionary for us when we were young. But then there's guys like Adam Hughes is massive for me. Adam Hughes and Kevin Maguire are, I think, two of the most foundational artists for my work personally. I was reading their Justice League run when I was like a little kid, and it was the first time I saw comic characters that made expressions like people make expressions. It was the first time I saw comic art where the main goal wasn't just to make everybody look cool all the time. A Kevin Maguire character can look really dopey a lot of the time, but that's because they're making faces like people make. And that was it was huge. It was so huge for me, seeing that. And it, I don't know, it was transformative.
I think another person who's a big influence on us artistically is somebody like Alex Ross, who does very realistic paintings, but our style is animated realism. It's got the movement of animation and the structure of realism. So being able to pull from a realistic reference and see how somebody is doing that and the softness that comes in versus abs everywhere all the time or, bifurcated boobs all the time. How do you make somebody feel authentic? And that's what we learned from somebody like Alex Ross. But I would also say we have lots of anime and manga influences.
True. Adam Warren, I've Empowered is one of my favorite comics, and Adam Warren's action sequences are just fantastic. They're so great to read. They're so energetic and full of life and movement. I look at his action sequences a lot when we're sitting down to rough out any fight pages that we do.
Or even just like how they do hair in Death Note.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I love the hair in Death Note.
Light Yagami's hair, forget it. It was gorgeous.
Fantastic.
It was gorgeous made.
Well coiffed.
I felt like I was learning more about drawing just from reading that book. So yeah, we pick up influence all over the place, but there are certainly a handful of creators who were the most important to us formatively. For writers, I think it's a little easier with writers to narrow it down to a small list because with artists, you take a little bit all over the place, whereas with writers, there tends to be more of like a body of influence. So Neil Gaiman, Mark Waid,
Garth Ennis.
Yeah, Preacher was huge on us.
Brian Michael Bendis.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. The most naturalistic dialogue. I know he's a very divisive writer, Brian Bendis. He's kind of, it seems like a love him or hate him kind of thing. The people who do not like Brian Bendis' writing seem to really not like his writing. And I'll admit there are definitely some things he's better at than others. But when he's writing a book that is a good fit for his style, nobody compares.
But to be honest, a lot of our writing comes from the changeover that happened in the early thousands with HBO television and them allowing themselves to get away from the syndicated TV format, which is, one episode, one adventure, one episode, one adventure. Things don't really tie in together. But because they then had this ability to have DVDs and stuff like that, you could get shows like The Sopranos, The Wire, 6 Feet Under, later on Game of Thrones and stuff. Even though Game of Thrones ended ass, it's still
I always hear that. I never really partook in Game of Thrones like that. So I only watched like maybe a few episodes, like the first season. But I know everybody like hates the ending so much, and I kind of know a little bit just from people explaining it to me. But
his ass.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other story. You can have us on again sometime, and we'll talk about Game of Thrones.
I think that we've been influenced more by shows like The Wire and Battlestar Galactica than we were by any comics we've read in terms of straight writing. Definitely the TV and good TV, our favorite TV, has been really impactful on our writing style.
No, that makes sense. Especially if I would say you're making like 3-dimensional characters, you're doing a lot of. I feel like. Now, I don't want to say this because it's going to sound probably kind of bad, but I feel like sometimes in comics, you have a lot of tropes or characters that end up being tropes, and they lack the depth that they probably should, or the writer's overshooting,
Where's the lie? I can't find it.
And I would say that's different for certain comics. Again, somebody like Brian K. Vaughan will have comics, again, that he means it. He commits.
Yeah, I think
cares.
I think that the same is absolutely true in television. There is a tremendous
plenty
amount
of shit TV,
of garbage television, and garbage writers who just churn out scripts because that's the job, and they care about as much about that as they care about, where their trash goes when they put it out on the street.
But the thing is, you can be inspired when you hit on magic. To some degree, the one singular season that's going to happen for Watchmen is magic.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'll take that
That's
one
art.
season of The Watchmen over 10 seasons of anything else. And damn if I would never have expected that to be the case. You want to talk about one of the biggest surprises for me was how good that Watchmen show was. I never in a million years would have thought that a Watchmen TV show, let alone a Watchmen TV show that's a sequel to the comic. Are you kidding? But it was brilliant. It was amazing to watch. So I think that there is certainly a lot of bad television, but television allows you to do things with character and especially with dialogue and interactivity, getting deep into these people that comics have a hard time doing. And as comic writers, I can tell you, there is so much that we want to do that gets left on the cutting room floor because of the amount of space that it takes to do dialogue in a comic form.
And how hard it is to be able to do things when you don't have a writer's room, when you don't have the giant team underneath you, when you're just two people making a book. All right, I've got a question over here.
Sure.
Yep, and after your question, I got 2 more over here.
Awesome.
Okay, so Tara asks over here, how far ahead do you guys plan your plots? Do you go issue by issue, season by season, plan out the entire series all at once, etc.? How do you do it?
Kind of all of the above. We think way ahead with our plots, for one thing. But how intricately it's planned, like we know what the ending is to Uniques already. We've got a 10-season plan, and we know every season. And we know what we're building to, and we know what a lot of the reveals are going to be. There's things that we're setting up in the very first issue of the book that aren't going to pay off until the very end of the series. But that being said, we don't go too deep into the details on the plans that we have that are too far out in the future.
Right. You know the broad strokes of what's going to happen, and that's the thing, is you have to know where you're aiming. Where am I pointing that target?
Yeah, what's the goal? Where am I trying to get to?
Right.
Because I have to know how to set things up. If you want to have a big twist in your third act, you need to start alluding to the idea in the first act so it all makes sense.
Not just that, you got to ask yourself, am I going to have a twist? What's going to happen? I need to know these things. Again, those broad strokes. So I would say whenever you're starting off your book, you should really know what the beginning, the middle, and end is, rather than going, say, episode by episode if you're doing it through Webtoon, or issue by issue if you're doing a comic. You need to have a solid idea, because flying by the seat of your pants is a recipe for disaster.
That being said, there is a balance that you want to strike.
Sure.
You want to be flexible. You don't want to be addicted to your plan, because you might come up with a better idea later on. And you don't want to be stuck with something because you overplanned early on and you don't want to have to change.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is you're always open to it. You know generally what's going to happen, but before it's canon, meaning you've written it, you've put it out and published it. Before it's canon, the sky is the limit.
Yeah.
You can change whatever as long as it still works for the story.
So the closer we get to the present moment of the story, the more detailed our plan. We have a general outline of the entire series. We have fairly specific thematic plans for what each season is going to be about, broadly speaking.
Right now, on our wall, season 3's plot points are there.
Right, because we're
format.
writing season 2 right now, but we have the plot beats for season 3 all laid out and ready. And then for the season that we're on, we want every issue generally broken down before we start writing the script for the first one.
Can I just say?
Generally, at this point, know too where the episode breaks are. As I am digging into the layouts for any issue, I know where the episode breaks are going to be for Webtoons as well, because that also makes a difference.
Yeah.
And it gives me a sense of how many episodes and stuff they're going to be, and what we might need to prep for it. What other stuff would we need to talk about? Because one of our favorite things with Webtoon is actually talking to the audience on Webtoon.
Yeah, the community aspect is really great in that platform. And the ability to connect directly with the readers is something we really enjoy.
Can I just say, I love how you guys just balance each other out when you're speaking, because it's I literally feel like you guys are just passing the baton, you guys finish each other's sentences, and it's I'm wow, just perfect symmetry with I'm just amazed by the way you guys were doing that.
There's a reason we're the two-headed tiger of comics, because we do finish each other's sentences, because we're not two different people. We're actually one person sharing a singular consciousness.
We've been together since we were 19.
Today is our 17th wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here during your anniversary.
Well, seemed like a nice way to end the evening. But yeah, and this October will be the 20th anniversary of our first date. So we pretty much figured out how to be ourselves by being together.
We've been together a long time. Again, we are the age of the younger characters in the Uniques.
Yeah, we're so used to being able to toss ideas back and forth at this point that it would be weird to try and do something just on my own. Yes. I wouldn't know where to, I reach a natural point where I just start gravitating towards comfort. What do I do now? What do I do? I have this thing. Tell me that I'm not crazy. Is it a good idea or not? We both have our own strengths. We both have different aspects of the creative process that we are more energized by.
I think that everybody would do well, even if it's not as intricate a partner for your writing process as
you don't have to live together for 20 years.
Right. But having someone that you can bounce ideas off, I think, is essential.
Yeah.
Because it gets it out of your head.
Yeah. And it gets you a second opinion. Although we've reached a point where we are so similar now that we need, third and fourth and fifth opinions. We have groups of editors that look over our comics every time we finish a script to make sure that we're not crazy. Because
Mark Dudley again is
Mark
one
is
of our
one of our
editors.
he's doing editing for us on season 2, and it's essential because we develop our own language together and things make sense to us, but we might not be presenting them in a way that would make sense to anybody but us.
Right. Well, honestly, for Mark Dudley, who's a mutual friend for me and Adam, and our wonderful interviewers here,
Otaku.
he is not just an editor, but he's also there to be a sensitivity writer. There are a lot of Black characters in season 2 that we needed to make sure that we were capturing their voices
We are
properly.
dealing with some heavy stuff.
Right. Some heavy stuff that we came up with where we're like, we are going to talk about this. And we thought of it back in the mid-thousands, like, oh, we're going to do this storyline.
And unfortunately, it's still relevant today.
That's right. We thought, with everything else that was happening, I remember 2015, I'm like, oh, well, when we do season 2, it will, we'll have made some changes and stuff, and we'll be able to look back and be like, oh, look at what history was.
We're still dealing with it. Still here.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Which actually, it makes it hard to sometimes talk about because, you're always in the thick of it. And, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily want to talk about social issues in their comic books. And so it's very prickly when it's brought up. So, we always have to give the audience enough candy.
But one of the
be
major
okay with actually doing some serious stuff.
One of the major themes of Uniques is what superheroes can do to change the world and what superheroes cannot do. The problems that you can't punch into submission. We really want to dig into those kinds of things. The places where, because if you think about it, and you don't have to think about it very hard, superheroes are just another arm of law enforcement. And in the Uniques world, that is very much literally true. You have to be licensed and registered as a superhero in order to perform that function professionally, because society tends to take a dim view on people putting on a mask and beating the hell out of people because I think they're a bad guy, right? We want accountability, and there should be accountability.
There should be.
Naturally, there should be.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the things that, you can't get away from right now, especially, but fucking historically, has always been the case. That the most important problems in our society can't be solved by law enforcement. So throwing in a superhero, what are they going to do? Superhero isn't going to solve poverty.
They're basically an extension of that.
Exactly. All the superhero can be, at best, is a firefighter. But if we're going to talk about who keeps setting the damn fires, superheroes can't do anything about that, at least not as superheroes. So in the process of educating these characters that we have and bringing them from a place of being, young, naive, idealistic kids who just want to go out there and set things right, and taking them to a more educated and informed place, we have to put them through some tough things, and they have to learn some tough lessons. And it was important to us both that we absolutely had to talk about these things, but if we're going to talk about them, we have to get it right.
Right.
Basically some authenticity there.
Yes.
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 And it has to be. It has to
Yeah.
be, because if you don't do it right, it's not worth
We
it.
can't tell our characters to go educate themselves and not educate ourselves first.
Yeah, it's gonna essentially then it's just gonna end up being kind of like a trope. The character's gonna become a trope, like you always see, or like the token character in a story.
The one thing we can't stand is making this seem easy. Because it's not. If it was easy, we'd have fixed this shit a long time ago. Some of it, even the things that we know have obvious solutions, making those solutions happen is extremely difficult. So even the things that seem like they should be easy are a nightmare of bureaucratic red tape and political infighting and struggling to get your message to the people in the way that they will hear and believe and agree with.
Right. And that's why Eunice is a longer story, because it needs the time to really tell the tale, not just because it's about, you need to show every stick of minutia, but you have to unravel things for an audience and tell that story in a three-dimensional way that they emotionally can connect with.
The
and
real
understand.
issues of the world are enormous and complicated, and we don't want to uncomplicate them, right? We want to deal with them in all of their complexity to the extent that we can. And to do that, we need a longer story.
Nice. Okay. No, I mean, it makes sense. Now, we are running toward the end of our stream here, but there are like two big questions that I want
All right,
to
let's
ask.
That's what we can do.
Okay. So, I want to know, do you guys have, and I know this may sound like a strange question, especially since you guys are, obviously you're in this together, but do you guys have a rival? In comics, a creative rival, not necessarily like in like a bad sense, but someone who who you feel pushes you to get better.
David Peterson. I don't see us as having rivals.
No, I don't
We
think
try
we
to be
have.
really friendly. We have a number
Not
of
like anime rivals.
No, we don't have Sasuke in our lives. There's no Bakugo on this train, thank God.
Oh,
I know all the fangirls are disappointed to learn there's no Bakugo, but
okay. Well, even more fair, do you guys creatively compete with each other?
No.
no. And here's the thing is, I tend, and I think Comfort would agree with me, I tend to think that we get a lot more done through, and I mean all of us socially, get a lot more done through collaboration and cooperation than competition. Competition tends to create animosity and adversity where there wasn't any. Competition tends to train you to think of people as adversaries, tends to train you to think of people as obstacles to be overcome. And I'm not interested in overcoming anybody. I'm not interested in outdrawing people. And I threw out David's name as a joke because I know he's around and he is a very good friend. But he absolutely is somebody who pushes us to do better, but not through any spirit of antagonism or competition.
Us
Like we are not in
versus them.
any kind of competition with David Peterson, not least of which because we do radically
Are
different
you
things.
sure? No, I'm kidding.
But having him as a friend and having the conversations we've had has made us think about things in a different way, has made us reconsider things that we had long held to be absolute. And that's really valuable. Our very dear friend, Brian Glass, who is a comics author, most famous for Mice Templar and the series Furious at Dark Horse, he is somebody who is always giving us challenges. Like, well, what if you try? Like, the existence of our book, Rainbow in the Dark, is because of a challenge that Brian Glass gave us. So I think that you can have a cooperative and friendly attitude, devoid of any competitive urge or animosity, and still push each other in a friendly kind of a way to think deeper about the things that you're doing and try things that you might not have done otherwise.
And I think one of the most important things is leadership. And that means not just leadership from an outside force, but leadership for yourself.
Yeah.
To make sure that every day you're working to get better. That choice to lead yourself into greatness is one you have to make.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. As far as if anything, I guess trying to overcome yourself would be really the more of the focus. You know, I mean, yeah, I can get down with that for sure.
I will say that I am the one person that I am in constant competition with.
Better or worse.
For better or worse. Yeah. I definitely have that artist thing where I'm always hyper judgmental of everything I do. Things that I would instantly forgive or enjoy even from other people. When I do it, it's like, no, unacceptable.
Yeah, I always enjoy asking this question because I think about some of our previous guests, sometimes we get different answers. A lot of them tend to be more along the lines of what you're saying, and then we get some that say, "Oh yeah, I have this one particular rival," but usually it's more in a friendly sense, where they may, kind of drive them. I kind of tend to be a little bit more like that, but I think that it makes sense, because you don't want to have animosity. You don't want, if you fall short, to feel as though like you're lesser than, because that can kind of mess with someone's confidence or their own ability.
Not only that, but I mean, from a practical standpoint, this is a small industry, man.
Yeah.
Everybody knows everybody. You can't afford to have somebody out there thinking, "Oh, that guy, what a prick." Like, you can't afford that, because you don't know who is going to be the guy that, like, 5 years from now becomes the gatekeeper to some gig that you really need, or whispers a word into the ear of some guy who you need on your side, and he's like, "Nah, that guy's a total prick." Like, you can't do that. You gotta at least be able to fake being a really good person, because it's just too small an industry. You can't afford not to have friends.
Yeah, no, that's true, and I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. They think just because it's comics that the professionalism doesn't have to come along with it.
Yes.
And I mean, I feel like I've experienced that like so many times where people kind of just want to, which is fine if someone wants to just kind of draw, that's fine, right? But there's a difference between a hobby and you wanting to actually make that hobby into your living,
Yeah. And nobody's going to pay you to just doodle in your sketchbook forever. You got to take this, you got to treat this like a job. The biggest difference between people who make it in comics as a career and people who don't is how much you respect the work.
And I feel like you guys really drive that point home
work,
in
like your body of work. I mean, respect the effort that the work takes.
You guys really drive that point home in your the complete guide to self-publishing comics book. Like when I'm going through that, I'm like, that's kind of brought up a few times. The whole aspect of the difference between being a professional and like hobbyist.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, if you're out there, and you haven't, for example, if you're thinking about getting into making comics or whatnot, really need to think about this. This is something that you're willing to. Sometimes maybe even do it when you don't really feel like doing it.
Absolutely. There's nothing you can do, no matter how much you love this job. There's no job you can have that you can do as much as you do this. There's not going to come a day where you wake up and would rather do anything else in the world than have to draw another comic page.
Now, before we bring this final question in, I guess we can go over what the comments are right here. It seems like we have a couple more comments that are here. And I'm not sure do you guys have any comments on your end as well? Or questions on your
I think
end?
we're good for now.
Okay. All right. So from Manny Names, we have, I want to see more biopunk comics. I'm currently producing an urban fantasy comic, if that counts. So I think that kind of harks back to earlier what we were talking about when we were talking. And
yeah,
that
I
would
love
be nice.
urban fantasy stuff. I would love to see more.
Rainbow in the Dark is an urban fantasy.
An urban fantasy story.
All right, and the next question, or not question, but statement I would say from Manny Names is, I was really disappointed with the Netflix Umbrella Academy. I don't know if anybody checked that out. I've never seen Umbrella Academy.
I would say that a lot of shows and stuff are like, what else is popular? Let's just do that, rather than trying to give the thing that they're doing its own voice.
It felt very CW-esque. So if you like Riverdale and Arrow and those kinds of like cheesy, soapy kind of shows, then give Umbrella Academy a try.
But if that ain't your bag,
yeah, if you're tired of that, and we were kind of tired of it when we watched it, so it was like, this is fine.
All right, and then now the last question that we have for you. This is like the big question. This is going to be a little bit weird to ask you guys, because you guys, have already advanced so far in your career, So this is going to be probably a little bit of an odd one, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway, just as a part of a tradition that we do.
Do it.
What is your end game? What's our end game for our whole career?
Finishing Geeks?
So our end game is this. We would like to make a studio ourselves and produce not just the uniques, but other comics that we've got ideas for, and be able to produce other people's books.
That we would
That would
genuinely love to
be
do.
the thing that I would want to do. That's where I'd want to start aging and retiring and stuff, because we are teachers till the end.
Mhm.
You know, even if we're not teaching classes, we're always teaching. And at this point in time, our goal is to start really being able to take other young professionals under our wing and bring them up to speed and set them free on their own path.
Yeah. It's the one thing that I feel is the most missing from the industry today is somewhere that aspiring young creators can go to learn what the hell they're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You don't have those open gigs anymore. You don't have those like professionally published anthology gigs anymore. This stuff just doesn't happen. So you have to do
You don't have
everything yourself.
studios that you can go to and learn from somebody.
Yeah,
You're just flapping in the wind and hoping for the best.
absolutely. And that means that you're having to self-publish, which is good for learning discipline. It certainly weeds out the people who haven't got the strength to make it through. But it also means that a lot of people learn a lot of bad habits because there's nobody there to tell them there's a better way to do things. A lot of people who could be great burn out early because there's no help, there's no hand up, there's nobody. You know, we naturally, as an end result of this being a very like sedentary and isolated career path, like we see each other a lot, but without conventions, that's the only people we see.
That's your social interaction.
And because of that, it's easy for people to not make those connections, to not connect to each other, to not reach out to other people, to not know how to ask questions or who to ask questions of. It used to be a long time ago that you couldn't find any information about making comics. Like nobody was talking about it. Unless you
guys
went to a convention and met other creators, there was nobody who even knew what you were asking about. Today, it's completely flipped. Everybody's talking about it, but there is a ton of terrible advice and terrible information that you just should not follow. But how do you know the difference? You know, on YouTube, everything's the same, and terrible advice can get millions of views and look just as legitimate as somebody who's, you know, speaking from good experience. So we would love to be able to create the kind of studio that used to exist. You know, you see the old black and white footage of Disney animation studios back in the 30s, 40s. It was like a party, man. I would love to have something like that. Like obviously a digital version of it, but that would be a dream to be able to do that.
You know, I was gonna say, like, it almost seems like you guys, in a sense of, we're doing social distancing before it was cool. You know,
That's comic, man.
yeah.
Not a lot of change in our day to day. Oh, we got to stay home and work all the time?
Wow.
Okay. I'm ready.
Yeah, that's the meme now.
No, but like, you know, I really appreciate you guys coming on today. Before we head on out, where can, like, for anybody who's checking you out for the first time, where can they find you?
Well, we are on the social medias everywhere with Comfort and Adam. So at Comfort and Adam, wherever you are, that's where we are. That's how to find us. We have a website, comfortandadam.com. You can find our comics on Webtoon. So you can search for Comfort and Adam there. You can also search for the Uniques, Rainbow in the Dark, or Kitty Game. You can find the complete guide to self-publishing comics at bookstores, but more likely today just on Amazon. You could buy the books on Amazon. We are everywhere.
We try to be everywhere that you want to be.
Like you
yeah.
said.
And I recommend anybody going ahead and checking out those links. They're all, well, I'm going to say the Uniques is a very good story. I definitely recommend that one. I definitely would say, you know, if you're interested in making your own comic, the complete guide to self-publishing comics will get you started right on your way. Even if you know what you're doing, it's still a good tool. Also, one last thing I want to say, if you are new to checking out Shining Otaku, if you enjoy creating comics or manga, or if you're a fan of them, go ahead and subscribe to join Shining Otaku, and also make sure you hit the bell so you get updated when we post. We're going to post all the links to everything in the stream that's taking place, so any of the links to Comfort and Adam's work. So definitely make sure you check that out, and we will see you guys later. Anything you have to say, Nico, before we head out?
That's all I got to say, guys. I just went ahead and posted in the YouTube and Facebook stream the links to pretty much a lot of their mediums there: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the personal website. Anyway.
Oh, wait. Hold on.
Shoot.
And if you guys would like to, it would be very nice if you guys say happy anniversary to Comfort and Adam. That would. So thank you so much for coming on today. I just want to make sure, if everybody can go ahead, just say that, it would be very nice. Anyway, now we will head on out. We'll see you guys later. See you in 2 weeks. We actually have a special interview, so 2 weeks from now.
Catch you all later.